Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good day. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12-Step Workshop. Please join me in prayer. Spiritual intervention. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Last week, we began to look at step 8. It's articulated on page 59, where Bill lists the 12 steps, 11 on that page, 12 on the next page. And it says, step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So there's a couple pieces to that. Made a list. Now it says all persons. I include institutions. I damaged some institutions that I had exposure to. Certainly the IRS, I cheated. My company, I cheated on my expense account. I made amends to the monastery because I was anything but an ideal monk toward the end, the last couple of years. I made amends to a couple of my employers that I'd had. I was less than an ideal employee. So these are just thoughts. I am modeling for you, being comprehensive in asking yourself, who did I diminish? Who did I harm? Keep in mind, it's not what you did. It was what was the impact, the negative impact of what you did on an institution or on a person. So made a list. And then it says, became willing to make amends to them all. You see, remember step 2? Bill invited us to name God. We weren't making a list, but we might have been making a list of the characteristics, the attributes, the qualities that we wanted and needed God to have. That was my invitation to you, an interpretation of what's in the book. We get to name in step 2 our concept and then allow it to change as we do. But Bill very carefully on page 47 said that willingness was the keystone, cornerstone. The willingness was the cornerstone, page 47. And then, of course, in step 4, we're making a list of the exact nature and sources of the problem, instincts gone awry, the manifestations of self-centeredness. And in the 6th step, we're making another list. The inclinations and behaviors that come from those instincts gone awry. And now we're making a list in step 8 of the impact of those behaviors coming from those sources, coming from those instincts. I hope you see the organic nature of this, hand in glove. And I've made the comment before. It's just an interesting observation, but it helps me understand the dynamic of the 12-step process. All of the even steps are naming steps. All of the odd steps are decision and action steps. It flows, I think, from our very basic natural structure. As human beings, we're human because of two things: our mind, which names things, and our free will, which makes decisions to take actions. Pretty interesting. Worthy of a meditation, actually, because it explains each step and it explains all the steps from my standpoint. So Bill continues on page 76. We started there. We looked at what he made comment of in terms of the introduction of step 8, but he also includes step 9. And I observed that the only step that he does that, pairing up two steps. I have no idea why he does it, other than I suspect that really understanding step 8 and 9 together kind of gives you the flavor of the potential naming and the repairing of the damage. A lot of people confuse 8 and 9. They're not able to make clear distinctions when they're talking about it. But with the way that I structure it, coming from step 8 as a naming and step 9 as an action, it makes it, I believe, a lot clearer to make that distinction. So tonight I'm going to talk only about step 8. Obviously, it'll leak over into step 9, perhaps occasionally, but I'm going to try to stay right focused on step 8. The assignment for next week, of course, is, well, maybe not of course, but is to look at step 8. So that, 9, so that we begin to take a look at it, rereading pages 76 through 83 from the perspective of step 9. Bill gives us operating principles of making amends. He gives us examples of making amends. He models about the potential implications of and the process for making amends. So I've had you read 76 through 83 from the perspective of step 8, naming people and institutions. Now I'm having you read the same material. You might want to use a different color highlighter from the vantage point of, through the lenses of step 9. Once you've completed reviewing step 8, not completing step 8, but when you're ready to address step 8, your list and complete it, read chapter 8 from the 12 and 12. You don't need to do that now unless you're ready to do your step 8. You might be still working on your step 4. You might be preparing to or finishing up on your step 5. Great. There's no rush, but make a note of the process, the suggestions I'm making, so that when you get there, you'll be able to remember clearly what the instructions are, because they're indicated in the assignment sheet. But I think my instructions are even more fine-tuned here verbally now. Read step 8 from the 12 and 12 when you're prepared to address step 8. That means you finish step 7 by your standards and your sponsor standards. And the same thing when you finish your work on step 8 and you've reviewed it with your sponsor and you understand step 9 and you're about to prepare to do step 9, and in the preparation of your understanding of step 9, read the 12 and 12 chapter 9 from the 12 and 12 on step 9, so that you stay in sync with what Bill's commentary is as you're prepared to do that step. The two things I really emphasized last time, and I will again tonight because it's so important. Well, it's important because Bill emphasized it. He says it twice. On page 76, he said, remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any length for victory over alcohol. And I made the comment, Well, that's about the first half of the first step, addiction. And on page 58, it says how it works. It says at the bottom of page 58, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any length, you are ready to take certain steps. So that's the implication. That's the commitment you made in step 3, the commitment to do steps 4 through 9 and finish them. On page 58, right at the beginning, how it works. So Bill's reminding us of that in step 8 and 9 because it's so these are the real difficult steps from my standpoint, not 8. It's difficult perhaps to get clarity. It's not difficult to do, it's just a list. There's no action involved other than making the list and having discussions with your sponsor or experienced people. Step 9, to use a very hackneyed phrase, that's where the rubber meets the road. The most difficult step of all of the 12 steps, actually, because it's the only step that requires us to go out to people who are not spiritual, who may even be quite dysfunctional, and to look them in the eye, figuratively speaking. You might be making an indirect amend, and talk about, in all humility, the damage that you've caused and your willingness to repair it to the best of your ability based on a dialogue with them, which we'll talk about beginning next week on the 9th step. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. It's so important, the big book italicizes it, the big book's way of highlighting. But I also connected the dots on page 79. In that first full paragraph, the 3rd line, it repeats the language almost identically, reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any length to find a spiritual experience. Oh, not alcohol, not addiction, but unmanageability, the spiritual malady, the second half of the first step. Then he puts us into prayer because it's a spiritual process for sure, a spiritual malady. We ask that we be given strength and direction. Well, if you're familiar with the 11th step, that's a total echo of the way the 11th step ends. Listen to it. Praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out. Remember the observation I made at the beginning of our journey tonight. We're human because we have a mind that thinks and knows, and we have a will that decides to take action. Look at what we're asking for. Direction, because we need to know what to do, and then strength, because we need the power to actually do it. No matter what the personal consequences may be, we've decided to go to any length, no matter what the personal consequences. And you'll see, and you've already seen it in reading the material in reference to step 8, you've seen that it actually says you're willing to do public humiliation and you're willing to go to prison. Yeah. Now, I'm going to say this, and I will say it many times because people need this comfort and this assurance and some confidence. I have never once, 32 years of doing this work. I'm 37 years sober, but you already know that I did this work when I was 5 years sober. 32 years of doing this work and helping people, listening to people, watching people. 32 years. I have never seen a person disadvantaged by a 9th step amends. Never once. But here's the qualification. Who followed direction given to them by an experienced person in making amends. I have seen plenty of persons hurt and or create chaos as a result of not knowing what they're doing or getting direction from ignorant, and I mean by that, they didn't know, and they didn't know that they didn't know, or inexperienced people. And I will say that more than once over the next several workshops. It's such an important thing. We need to go to people who have knowledge about the amends process and have specific experience with the specific amend that I'm making. If they haven't made amends to the IRS, you find somebody that does have that experience and knowledge of accounting and the legal implications. More about that when we get to the 9th step. But that's an example of what I'm talking about. I want to emphasize again on page 77, very top. Yes, of course, this is our journey. Yes, of course, this is our rehabilitation. Yes, of course, this is our recovery. Yes, of course, this is our spiritual awakening. At the moment, he says, we are trying to put our lives in order. Absolutely. Pay attention. But this is not the primary purpose. Those are my words. But this is not an end in itself. Here's the primary purpose. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. We pray every night at the close of the workshop, the St. Francis prayer. The prayer starts out, make me a channel. Perfect. That's the radical change I want. I want to be a conduit of grace. I want to be a conduit of life. I want to be a conduit of reality. I want to be a conduit of God. All synonyms from my standpoint. I want to be the channel. As I've said, I'm the lantern, I'm not the light. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. It doesn't say to be happy. No, it doesn't say even to be happy, joyous, and free, although that is certainly one of the promises. But it's not about us. And it hasn't been about us. It's about our relationship with power, isn't it? Right from the get-go, from step 1. Our problem was an ineffective relationship with power, real power. Whatever that is, and you get to name it. I'm not going to go through much more now of the big book, but I am going to make comments from the big book and from the 12 and 12, kind of an aggregation of those, a distillation of those, as well as my own reflections on it and a reflection on my own experience. This is about being objective. That's why the set-aside prayer is so important. Set aside our knowledge, our prejudices, our expectations, our prior experience. Even if you've gone through the steps in the workshop, even if you've gone through the steps with a reasonably informed and experienced person previous to this, be willing to really have it set aside so that you might be given some new subtleties, some new information, maybe even gross information, meaning substantially different, and or maybe see from a different angle, or discover something that really does need to be fine-tuned. Now, I'm not saying that you need to do anything perfectly, please. I'm always having to do the caveat once I remember who I'm speaking to. Please loosen the grip. All right, loosen the grip. Yes, you're responsible for the effort, but you're not responsible for the outcome. Yes, there's God. Do you trust God or not? Yeah. All right. So if you're inclined toward perfectionism, attempt to really lean into that, lean into it, that set aside attitude. Do a sweep. This is inventory. Like we did with step 4, looking for a sweep of our lives in resentment, looking for a radar sweep. I didn't ever recommend that you go to your journals or go to your high school albums, whatever you call those, yearbooks. No, I go to album pictures. No. Because it's not about creating a list. It's about identifying the hurts and the betrayals in you, in the resentment inventory, in the fear inventory, in the dishonesty inventory, in the sex inventory. And as I've indicated, it doesn't need to be 100% complete, in the sense that once you've identified 5 to 10 to 20 of any category, there's going to be a lot of redundancy in the step 4. So I shaped it. Now, you work with your sponsor in terms of the thoroughness that is appropriate for you. And at different stages and ages in recovery, it will be perhaps different for you. But do a radar sweep of your relationships, mostly with people, but also institutions, as I indicated in my opening comments. You've got enough sense now from the 4th step and from the 6th step of inventory. Words that are used in either the big book or mostly the 12 and 12. That's why it's such a great read. It's got a rich, colorful flavor of words and phrases, accurate and unsparing. Well, we heard fearless in step 2. We heard fearless in step 4. I don't remember whether the words in fearless in the material between 76 and 83. Next week, we'll begin going through that line by line and commenting on it. So I'll keep that in mind and make a comment if it comes up. Deep and honest search of motives and actions. I'm going to go over what's on the card. Well, maybe I'll do that now. I will. I'll do that now just so that we have a frame of reference as to where to hang this material. So on the 3x5 card, now some people need a larger card for different reasons. Could be just visual, it could be organizational, it could be because they've been very busy. Well, whatever. 3x5 is a suggestion, 5x8, I don't care. But I'm talking about one piece of paper for each person, one piece of paper for each institution. And put their name on it, of course. As we did with step 4, this isn't in the assignments. In fact, it's just come to me as something that needs to be done. Well, at least it was a recommendation from the man who took me through the steps the first time, is put a little prayer at the top. Holy Spirit, allow me to see the truth. God, open me up so that I see objectively. I'm not going to diminish it. I'm not going to exaggerate it. I'm just going to try to see it as it is. That's too much, but you got the feel of a potential prayer there. Who did I diminish? What did I do? The actual behavior, be specific. I stole money. That's not specific. I stole $10,000. That's not specific. I stole $10,000 20 years ago. That's specific. Or maybe even it needs to be more specific, but put some detail in it. As I mentioned in the 4th step, as I mentioned in the 6th step, both about inventory, the specificity is critical from my standpoint, because it allows us to get away from denial and rationalization. That's the word I was looking for, when you're specific and attempting to be objective. Then what harm did it cause? Notice the second question is about what you did. I gossiped. You might think that, but this question will really sift it out. What harm did I cause? Did they lose a job? Did they lose a relationship? Did they lose a reputation? It might be that they did hear about it and you ruined a friendship, theirs to you, and or you seriously damaged their emotions because it created a lot of stress in their life. You remember the questions in the fourth column inventory, question number 6 and 7, especially 6? It had 5 or 6 items to look at. Physical, mental, emotional, financial, spiritual, any other variation. Not that you will have harmed them in all of that. No, that would be silly. You're not that powerful and you're not that important. I'm quoting the man who was talking to me. But be specific. What harm did I cause? When I talked about gossip, he said, once he never told me what to do. Never once told me what to do. Never told me what to put on the list, but he asked questions. Oh my God. He was like the Inquisition. He had great questions. Like I'm asking you to think about in the terms of, and 40% of the people, 50% of the people that I thought I might have harmed, I did not harm. I had guilt, I had shame, but there was no harm to that person or that institution. Some of us are overly responsible. You did not cause COVID-19. You know what I mean? Lots of people have a unhealthy relationship with responsibility. Those are the first 3 questions that I ask people to put on there. I'm going to stop the sharing now. I'll come back to it in a minute. That's not all the information to go on the card. But for right now, that's the first instruction I give to people so that they get very clear, very specific, and very objective. This doesn't have to take a long time. I don't mean that, but I'm attempting to be thorough in my commentary about it. A deep and honest search of motives and actions. That sounds like even a meditation. Have a piece of paper when you're at your desk, in your chair, sitting in your lazy boy with the 8x11 page on your lap, and you're thinking about this in prayer. And just allow it to bubble up. And as you do this, when you're at step 8, I'm not asking you to do this until you get to step 8, but you might make the notes so that you know what to do when you get to step 8. Then allow it to bubble. And you'll be in the car driving, or you'll be watching a show and you'll be engaged with maybe other people, and something will surface. And you'll go, oh, wow, I had forgotten about that. Or you'll be in a meeting and somebody will mention something. You'll go, oh, I remember. Accurate and exhaustive survey of past. So we're talking about, you've heard the word painstaking. It's used in the promises after the 9th step. If you are painstaking. Some people just take it at face value and they don't look the word up and they think, whoa, God, it's got to be hard. That's what painstaking means, painful. Yeah, no, look it up. Careful with detail. Diligent with detail. That's all it means, painstaking. In other words, giving it some effort, giving it some energy. No pain involved, other than the output of energy. Name the flaws in our makeup. Well, we had some practice with that in the 4th step. And that's why I think Bill ties the 8th step to the 4th step. In fact, in the 8th step, he said, and we quoted, We made the list when we did inventory, but that's why I put it in the inventory, not to focus on it, but to at least create a visibility as a parking spot for a thought or a question, or I got to get back to that and think it through, like we're doing now. Synonyms for the word harm, this is my interpretation: disturb, injure, instincts in collision. Those instincts, we already saw that: fight, flight, and freeze, going to the emotions, right? Anger, fear, dishonesty. The word hurt, wrongs. These are synonyms for harm. Criminal, straightforward. Betrayal, infidelity. Negative thinking, negative attitude, negative emotions, depressive. These are words not coming just from me. They're coming from the big book, mostly from the 12 and 12. That's why I say Bill was preparing and experiencing a whole bunch of emotional sobriety at the time. Read the 12 and 12 and look for the words emotional sobriety. It's all through it. And that's when he wrote that article in 1956, got published in 1958. The 12 and 12 was written in 53. Bill was deep into this next stage of recovery, which is emotional sobriety. Then he wrote that article, Emotional Sobriety, The Next Frontier, which is a lot of the work that I've been doing with Dr. Alan Berger, as I've made it very clear to you. Make sure that you're very clear, and maybe even make a note of it, that you are making this list and you're being thorough, but that you don't get energized at this point to make an amend on your own, that you come to a conclusion: oh my God, I've got to take care of that. I got to clean it up. I mean, I'm going to see my cousin next week. Yeah, maybe. Nothing gets done, no action taken until you've had a thorough conversation with your sponsor about every one of them. Not that they're approving you, not that they're telling you what to do. I don't mean that at all, but you need an objective sounding board. And I've said, I believe I've said to you, the man who took me through the steps, I did this, I talked about it, I think in the sex inventory, where he said, I have no experience with that, a man. It's not my background. I don't have experience with having to clean that up. You need to go to a woman in recovery. This is part of the 8th step. This is preparing for the 9th step. It takes a lot of preparation. Get very clear with that. And he said, sit down with that woman and ask her, since it's been 25 years, would she even want it resurrected? This is so embarrassing. A man of my stature and reputation to have to go to somebody. Yeah, really, exactly. That was my thinking in those days. And I went and I asked her, and she led me and guided me. Yes, she would want it addressed for her freedom. If I got free, that's good, but for her freedom. And then she gave me specific directions, which we'll talk about when we get to the 9th step. But the point here in the 8th step is he sent me to somebody because he didn't have the experience. I went to a tax accountant, a specialist in dealing with the IRS, to kind of straighten all of that out. I went to an attorney to talk about some potential criminal implications of stuff. I went to a therapist to talk about the implications of addressing this with even my family and how best to navigate that. I'm a big believer in therapy. My family has been exposed to and very experienced in therapy. So it wasn't like it was coming out of left field. We had been through a group therapy program in the hospital when my wife was getting sober, and each one of the kids had their own experience with that individually and with the group. So I'm not saying that that's a recommendation. No, I'm sharing my experience with it, and that it wasn't unusual for me or my family. Two of my daughters have undergraduate degrees in psychology. So they were ready. When we get to the 9th step, we'll talk about that. It's not about guilt and shame, unhealthy guilt and shame. All right. And that's where this man who took me through the steps, and I'm modeling now, the role of a sponsor is to be a sounding board and a wisdom person. Not telling them what to do. I'm not the parent or the police, but asking questions to help them discern, the individual, help me discern what is just guilt and what is real, unhealthy guilt. It's not about my discomfort. Oh, I'm real uncomfortable with that person. I need to make amends. Maybe, but you heard me, and I stressed it on page 77. The real purpose is not me, not my comfort. Oh, yes, one of the outcomes will be my freedom. One of the outcomes of this process is my self-forgiveness. I'm very clear on, and I got clear on the process of forgiveness once I finished my 9th step, and I looked up the word forgiveness in a dictionary. Look at my hand. You've seen me do it before, but it's just such a powerful reminder of what forgiveness is, a decision to release them. And when we release them, we are released. If you didn't have a chance to attend the workshop with Dr. Luskin, who wrote the book, literally, on forgiveness, it will be posted in YouTube at some point, and we'll let you all know when it is, and don't miss it. It was beyond my expectations. Not me, him. I did good work, but he hit the moon from my standpoint. The 8-step list turns out to be like a roadmap. All right, because I numbered them, the cards. And so when I went through them, I was able to sort them into 3 categories of willingness. Oh yeah, absolutely willing. And they're easy ones. I recommend that we order them in the easy to the moderate to the hard ones, or maybe a 4th category, hell no, never will. No, I'm serious. It's okay to have that stance. Hell no, I'm going to go to my deathbed. All right. They've hurt me, or whatever the thoughts are or the feelings are. Okay, hold it. Just hold it as long as you can. The spirit will, in fact, loosen the grip at some point. But organize it into willing, moderately willing. Wow, that's, well, we'll see. And then the never, maybe 4 categories. And so I ordered them in that. And I recommend people do the easy ones first, for the simple reason that we get practice. We learn the words, we learn the phrases, we learn the feelings, we learn the actions, we learn the reactions. It's so important. This is all 8-step. I'm not talking about 9th step. I'm talking about preparation, preparing. So I'm going to organize it so that they're the easy ones to begin with. Now, I've heard other people have a different experience where the person says, oh, do the hard ones first, then it makes everything easy. Whew, not my experience and not my recommendation, but take direction from your own sponsor. And then in prayer, figure out what you want to do. So the 8th step is like a roadmap. And when I finished it, I dated it. Maybe I crossed it off. I checked it. I certainly gave myself the indication that that was done. So it was my accountability partner also. I mean, it took me over 6 months to finish my amends almost each time, but I finished them within about a 6-month period. Did you just hear what I said? yes, you can finish your amends. You hear such nonsense in a meeting. Oh, you'll never finish your amends. I'm just going to make living amends. Yeah, put your crystals away and get real. All right? Because this is not about fantasy. This is not about fairy dust. This is about feet on the ground and taking responsibility to do the best you can to attempt to address and or repair the damage. I do believe in living amends. If you have that as part of your thought process in the 8th step, I do believe in it. Living changed. Amends has 2 definitions from my standpoint. Amend, mend, all right? Amend, change, me. There's no point in me committing to my wife for fidelity going forward if, in fact, I have no such intention of changing my behavior. That would be total sham. So it's not that I'm going to be perfect, but I am committed to changing my behavior. And then amend has the other connotation of repair, mending, repairing. You can't change the past, but we can change our attitude about it, and we can attempt to repair it. And we'll talk a lot about that when we get to the 9th step. So the roadmap has all that information on it, more to come in a minute. The 4th item, at least, and maybe the 5th item. And we date it when we've completed it, all right? So that we know what we've done. It was so important to me that I had that list and I kept it till I finished the 9th step. And I'll tell you, I thought I finished my 9th step. And about a year later, I was really uncomfortable with something in my life, whatever it was. And I went to this man and he said, did you finish your, I said, yes, of course, we were there. I went over it. We talked about it. I was done. You agreed I was done the way I expressed myself. He said, yes. He said, why don't you go home? You still have the list? I said, yes, I still have the list. Why don't you go home and spend 30 minutes in prayer and meditation and look at each one and ask yourself to be guided as to whether you finished them or not. Brilliant. Here's this list. It's all torn up. It was an 8 by 11. That was my very first. It was a mess. Coffee stains and wrinkles and cross off and, you know, the real mess. And so, I mean, it's all crossed off. 2 pages. It's all crossed off. I'm in prayer and I'm looking at each one and I'm looking at it and I'm remembering and I'm looking at it and oh my God, it's crossed off. But I never made that one. I made up my mind that I didn't have to do that. And the voice said, and did you talk to anybody about your great decision? No, I didn't. All right. So I went back. I told him, he said, make the amend. I did. I got free again. The list was my accountability partner. It's objective. It's either done or it isn't. And I had to look underneath the scratch offs because I had rationalized. And fortunately, I was open and willing, and the light shone underneath the scratch off, and I was able to see that. Part of the 8th step for me is dress rehearsal. Sacred journey. I had to sit with this man and dress rehearse the recommended and agreed upon amends to my wife. He played the role of my wife, and I verbalized 15 or 20 minutes worth of making an amends. I got practice. And he played the role without any drama to it, but just realistically, so that I would have a little bit of pushback and resistance in a conversation with another person, was so helpful. And he pointed out what his experience was in doing the very same thing with his wife. So he had a practical experience. He basically was a had a parallel history to mine in terms of business and in terms of his religious tradition, in terms of his attitude and philosophy about marriage. He was married for 45 years at that point, had been separated for a year or two. And I mean, the typical stuff that goes on in homes where there's dysfunction, had 8 children. So he knew it, and he had resolved his marriage problems. I'll talk more about that when we get to the 9th step. So he was an experienced person who could really, I could hear and he could hear me, and he could share me his experience, his thoughts, his feelings, his actions. Dress rehearsal. When I came to the conclusion that I needed to write a letter to somebody, because it would be inappropriate to face them, or in fact, they didn't want to see me. We'll talk more about that in the 9th step. I'm preparing in the 8th step. And he said, and Herb, I want you to read the letter to me when you're done with it, before you send it. Brilliant. Because he was able to point out, so you know what, I'm going to soften that up a little bit. Or really, Herb, you really want to go there with that? I mean, I've dealt that with my people that I help with making their amends. And wow, in early recovery, there's so much passive aggressive stuff. I'm writing, this man was writing to a estranged wife, and he was saying, well, I really do apologize for being such a drunk and such a bad husband and such a bad supporter of the family. But if you hadn't been such a bitch, I said, well, you know what? Maybe you don't take her inventory in that letter. I'm serious. That the way he did actually wrote, maybe not those words, but they were close to it. So never send a letter that you haven't had somebody vet, somebody objective that will say, yeah, that looks pretty good. Or, well, you might want to think about that. Or you might want to think about this. I went to this man and I was uncomfortable in early amends process. And this is about the 8th step. I had my list with me, and I carried it 24/7 actually until I finished it. And I met with them, and I said, Jerry, I'm just so uncomfortable right now, and stress and family and work. And he said, well, you're in your amends, aren't you? I said, yes. I said, how many do you have? He said, and I said, 35. And he said, how many have you done? And I said, 5. And he said, well, wonderful. Wow, you're making some. When's the last time you made an amends? Oh, a month ago? Herb, you've lost your priorities. Well, I'm really busy, Jerry. The promises are coming true. Everything is blessing and I'm overstressed. He said, you know what? You've lost your priorities. Why don't you go in prayer and focus on making the next amend this week? Well, I was in such pain. I made 3 amends that week, and I got out of the pain and experienced again the happiness and the freedom and the promises. So then I took off it. But you see, it was an accountability partner. I could not see that the source of my pain was and I said to him, I'm willing. And he said, her willingness without action is fantasy. Yeah, a hard ass. Willingness without action is fantasy. Everything we want in the promises is on the other side of step 9. We'll talk about the promises here at some point in the next couple of weeks and contrast that with the bedevilments. That's in the Way of Life document. And I'm going to read it here as a meditation. It's so phenomenal. It's put together by a friend of mine who's now dead. He wrote his own guidebook to the big book, Dan Sherman, and gave me permission to put it in my Way of Life document. I give him credit for it because it was a wonderful insight, connecting the bedevilments at the beginning of the step process and the promises at the end of the step process, and seeing it line up almost line by line by line by line. I hope Bill was conscious of it when he did it, because it's brilliant. The fact that it's lined up, but it was brilliant that he had the insight. In the step 9 section, just make sure that you know it's there, not that I'm asking you to do anything with it. There is a 3-page meditation on forgiveness. I believe personally, from my unpacking of my own experience, that forgiveness started with the 4th step. Started, especially with that 4th column of the resentment inventory. And then, because I took responsibility. And then it finishes with the 9th step, when you're finished with the 9th step, because you've made a decision to change and you're in the process of being changed. And you've made a decision to repair all the damage in your life that you've ever caused. Oh, yeah. All the damage in your life that you've ever caused, to repair all of it. And by the time you're finished your amends, you're set free because you've set them free. Listen to that prayer of St. Francis tonight when we say it. It's got 2 references to forgiveness at the beginning of the prayer and at the end of the prayer. And many of you are familiar with the Lord's Prayer. It's in the Christian scripture. We forgive them their debts, and to the extent that we do that, our debts are forgiven. A little clumsy wording, but it comes from 2,000 years ago. But the point is, when I release them, I am released. It's counterintuitive, paradoxical, but 100% my experience. And now it's documented with Fred Luskin's articulation of the human psychological process of forgiveness without any reference to spiritual. It is a human process, which is captured by Bill intuitively in the 12-step process, because the 12-step process, as I mentioned earlier, is a human methodology based on the way we're structured. The spirit and the attitude I'll stress when we talk about the 9th step, but the primary attitude that I would want you to incorporate into the 8th step, certainly love and tolerance, which is built into the 10th step. We enter the world of the spirit, page 84, I believe it is. We enter the world of the spirit. Love and tolerance is our code. Certainly that's the attitude approaching step 8, but also the terms helpful and forgiving. Helpful and forgiving. On that roadmap, you'll also be encouraged to determine whether it's a direct amend or indirect. What do we mean by direct? Face-to-face? I also think phone is direct. Email is not direct. Text is not direct. All right? Zoom would be direct. Sure. So what's indirect? Well, a letter, that would be indirect. And there are some other things I'll mention when we get to the 9th step. But it will be important to be specific about this item that I threatened to tell you about here earlier. And that's the 4th item. What specific action is necessary? See, that's the amend. But I encourage you not to put the 4th item on your card until after you've finished all 3 items on each card. That way you have the preparation of looking at what you did and the harm it caused without cutting it any slack, because you're anticipating the amend that is necessary. We're human beings and we will try to take the easier, softer way. So I don't even give that instruction on the 4th piece of information until the people I work with have completed their first 3 items. Then when they say, I'm done with my cards, I go, yeah, not really. We got 1 more item, maybe 2. The 4th item is, so what's the appropriate action of justice? How are you going to balance the scale? That's a wonderful mental image, Lady Justice, that blind statue with the scales holding it. How are you going to, I got it from Chuck C. He uses it in his book, New Pair of Glasses. What specific action, notice specific, are we going to take? Oh, I'm going to say, I'm sorry. Well, we're going to see in the text that sorry doesn't cut it. No, sorry is not a word I use. I used it too often when I was using my alcohol. Regret, I do use that. I also mentioned that we want to perhaps indicate a level of willingness. And you might want to use a 3-level or 4-level, as I mentioned. 3-level, 4-level. It would be, yeah, easy one I'll do, and I'll do those first. Moderate resistance, okay, number 2. Number 3, oh man, that's going to be really hard. I'm going to have to really wait and be prepared to do that. And then 4 is hell no. I'll never do that. I'll take that one to the grave. It's nobody's business except mine. And besides that, and we have lots of reasoning that's all unhealthy. That's a kind word. And then another item is, do I see them or not? Do I address them or not? There are people that I can't find. There are people that I shouldn't find. I can't find them because I don't know their name. I can't find them back in 1988 because there was no internet at that time. And so it was a lot more difficult. Now, I have had people hire private detectives in a real serious situation. In the 32 years, only 2 people I've been working with that made that decision. It might be appropriate. As I mentioned, it was very exceptional, especially now with the internet. It's pretty easy to find people if they're still, well, whether they're alive or dead. And then what about people that you shouldn't find? People that in a conversation with your step guide or sponsor and or in prayer, it would cause more damage, because that's the 9th step. We make the amend unless it's going to cause more damage to make the amend, more damage to them or more damage to others. And we'll talk about that when we get to the 9th step. So what about people that you know how to find, but it's totally inappropriate by your judgment to resurrect that issue? I will have a suggestion for that, but you need to be conscious of that as you prepare your 8th step. What about dead people? Yes, I made amends to all of the dead people or the people that I harmed that were dead. There weren't that many, but I was able to, and those are stories for the 9th step. So the card is very useful as a roadmap. It's very useful because it invites us to specificity. It's very useful because it's a card that we have and that we can continue to complete as our unconscious is unpacking this, as you will also experience the mystery and the miracle of coincidences of consciousness or occasions of availability once you start this process. Those of you who have done step 8 and 9 work know exactly what I mean. Stuff that just can't possibly happen happens. The 9th step is riddled with miracles for everybody, usually. And you can finish your amends. We'll talk about that when we get to the 9th step. I'm just laying that out there so that it's a goal to finish amends, and it's realistic. the people I couldn't find or the people I shouldn't find, I created a prayer practice for in answer to that question number 4. What specific action? Well, it was a light touch harm. I mean, if I could meet with them, I would if it were relevant, but it's not that relevant, or it's not that important, or I can't meet with them. So I pray for, a day or 2 for them and for their healing. Or if it was a moderately impactful harm, maybe a week or 2 or 3, prayer each day for their healing. If it was a pretty substantial harm and there's no way that I can repair it and or meet with them and or find them, or whether I should or not, then it might be, I think the longest was a 3-month daily prayer practice for their healing. But see, I was specific in the answer to number 4. I can't find them, or I shouldn't find them. And that was the conclusion in discussion with my step guide sponsor. I don't make any unilateral decisions, but I have to make the final decision. And then I have a specific plan of action. And if it's a daily prayer for 3 months, then I know that I'm done at the end of 3 months. Always staying willing that if in fact circumstances changed in any way that surfaced a change that would invite me to make that amend directly, then I would be willing to do that. Not a dodge, a reasonable alternative so that I can finish and bring it to conclusion to the best of my ability.
Yes, hi, good evening. Herb, would you like to give out the homework for next Tuesday?
Yeah, I'll confirm, is to read the material from 76 to 83 from the viewpoint of the 9th step. So in assignment 22, it would be item number 1. Item number 1 is to reread that material from the viewpoint of the 9th step and the principles and the examples that he gives, so that you can now put some flesh on the comments that I made about the 8th step, and then I'll unpack it next week. I'll do it actually page by page and line by line. All right, so let's have some questions about the 8th step.
I wanted to make a comment about something you said tonight about the 8th step. That it's basically, it's like a ramp into the 9th step, and on the other side of the 9th step is I think you said something like everything we've ever wanted and hoped for, something to that effect. And it occurred to me that I've created a life with very small wants and hopes, and the hopes and wants that I've had have been so undermined by a story that I can't have it, or I don't have enough money for it, or I don't have the right connections for it, or whatever the story is of why I can't have it, or that everyone, I'm just the exception to the person that can't have it on the planet. And I wondered, to the extent, with a sponsor a number of years ago, I got to step 8 and she suddenly couldn't work with me anymore. Her schedule got too full. So, and I've never quite gotten there. And I wonder if it's because I don't even believe that there's not a really true incentive, because I'm so disconnected to the possibility of having a life that's bigger and easier and more joyous. And
well, I'm really glad that you're listening, because I don't want to create hyperbole here, meaning exaggeration. So everything I've said is a restrained understatement. How's that?
Well, I recognize that I maybe that's how I can reverse engineer like a true willingness to.
Well, but you're here
and desire. Well, I am, but I haven't worked on a fourth or fifth column. I mean, a third or fourth column in weeks.
Well, that's okay. Are you finished with the resentment inventory?
No.
Oh, well, what's preventing you from finishing?
Well, I haven't, I've had the excuse of I'm busy with work. I'm now started school.
Okay.
I'm
all right, great.
but I
all right. Here's the question for you. Prayerfully ask yourself, and gently, don't beat yourself up with it. How free do you want to be, and how soon? That's all. How free do you want to be, and how soon?
Okay. So just as simple as that, versus like, oh, I need to know what I want on the other side of this miraculous possibility of what could be in step 9. Okay.
It never occurred to me to write a book. I finished the 3 series of steps, 1988, 1991, 1996, and I wrote my first book in 2004. And I've written 2 since, and I've got another one cooking. But it wasn't my plan. I'm not an author. Well, apparently I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
Buckle up and be surprised.
I'm open to that.
Yeah. Well, we'll see, won't we?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it does definitely get at something tender, like,
Yeah. And that's where prayer and sponsorship, and I'm not sure, if you wanted to seek a little professional help to break the logjam, that might be necessary. But it's about priorities, and work is important. And your social life is important. How important is your freedom? How important is it for your life to flourish?
Yeah. Well, I am really grateful. I have a therapist I just started working with who's really helping me get at the stuff. It's like it just feels like the full constellation is kind of lining up in terms of the support team and readiness. So
it was absolutely my experience during the step process from 1988 through 1996. I was in and out of therapy, supplementing the work I was doing. Yep.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
No, thanks for being there, and just show up and do the next indicated third column.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could address a little more deeply finding that balance of guilt versus unhealthy guilt.
Yeah. It's a great question. I probably can't without just throwing a lot of words at it, and I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. It's probably something that you talk to your sponsor about in a specific, because the only way that you're going to do it is not in theory. You're gonna address something that you're in you don't even have to name it unhealthy, that you feel guilty about. Mm-hmm. And then especially if she's an experienced person, then she will give you some feedback as to whether, or ask you some questions as to what your thoughts are about the reality of it. So that would be my suggestion. Yeah, because it needs to be a conversation of your specific feeling of guilt, your specific feeling of shame, and then to see if it's rooted in reality. I mean, if you feel guilty that you're a bank robber and you see that you are a bank robber, well, then you're a guilty bank robber. Now, it still might be okay with you. That might be just a healthy guilt.
Okay. it's mainly parental and this is embarrassing, but I haven't made any direct ninth step amends to any of my children.
Okay.
I have 3.
Yeah.
And been in the program for quite a few 24 hours.
Yeah.
And have done a ninth step before and gotten a lot of freedom from it.
Well, you say you feel guilty about that, or you feel shame about that?
I think it's embarrassing.
Oh, well, you are. You should. Yeah. Yeah. It's appropriate that you're embarrassed, and it's healthy.
So, and it's the types of guilt and the different things that I feel guilty for are not necessarily mine. And so I have to get with my sponsor about those.
What's happening is you're talking in generalities, and it won't work. And I'm not going to probe for specifics, because that's personal. I don't want to do that with you, recorded and on a large screen.
Right. I was just saying it's going to have to be specific with my sponsor.
That's it. Yeah, or with a therapist. If your sponsor's not equipped for it, many people are not equipped in terms of knowledge and or experience. They wouldn't be able to help you. Yeah. Don't go to a dry hole for water.
Well, I do have a therapist, and I have a sponsor who also has children. So
there you go. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Would a harm to myself be my perfectionism?
Well, is it an asset?
Clearly not.
Okay, well, that's at least a 6-step defect, isn't it?
Yes.
And then you'll determine whether it's been harmful to you or not. And thank you for the question, because it trips my trigger that finishing the 9th step is the biggest amend that we can make to ourselves for our lives of character defects. Finishing our 9th step, where we're bringing healing to other people, paradoxically brings healing to ourselves. I'm so glad that you said it that way.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to share, and it might be helpful for other people, about an amends that I made and how important it was that I sat with my sponsor and I shared it with her. The amends that I was making towards my husband, because I had caused the bank account to be foreclosed 3 times by writing bad checks, because I lived in this attitude of I deserve, because I suffered like as a child. And as I was reading it, like I was, like you had said something about like almost acting it out. I was reading over what I was going to say, and she listened very patiently. And at the end, she said, did you notice that after every sentence, you had the word but? And that was such an eye-opener for me that I wasn't really making any amends here.
Right.
I was looking for my husband to validate my insane behavior.
Yeah.
And it was just so good, because when I really did go to make those amends, what I basically did was that I handed over to him the bank account, and I opened up my own bank account. And that was it. That was the end. I didn't have to keep making an amends. And that's what I see, this action. What's the action that I'm going to take to support that amends? And it was such a relief. Yeah. There's no other word except that. It was such a relief not to have to keep repeating the same thing, because I was hurting myself.
Yeah.
Because I was living with the dishonesty and the guilt and the shame.
But you can't see it until somebody holds a mirror up and you're willing to look at the truth.
It's I was in enough pain.
Yeah.
Like you said, I wasn't enough pain. For me, pain is always that thing that's going to make me take that fearful step. I was petrified to do this.
Yeah.
And it was really, it was very good, because the first time when I came to make these amends without having a plan of action, and I said, well, I'm so sorry that I did it. I'll never do it again. And he said, it's too late.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was like, all right, we got to get divorced right now. Here I am making these amends, and you're being so inconsiderate. It it was the best thing that he ever said to me. You know, he also
you were being inconsiderate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. You hadn't given it enough consideration. Yeah.
And I wasn't really willing to do anything about it.
No, exactly.
I just wanted him to give me a V. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But he wasn't going to do it.
Right.
He was suffering too.
Yeah.
And there's one other thing is that about like having, I really see it having like God intervening. I was an obnoxious ninth grader. And when I was doing these amends, I remembered a ninth grade teacher that I really made her life hell. That's what I did. I was out to make her life hell. And I was really remorseful about it. And I prayed over it. And my sponsor kept saying to me, just stay there. You'll see something is going to happen. And then I hadn't seen her for years, for like 20 years. I met her on a bus. I was sitting right near her. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And then I knew, you don't make amends on the bus because I was ready right now to make these amends. But no, okay. So I said to her, I'd like to share something with her. And it was such a beautiful amends. We hugged and, she said, I understand today that you were a ninth grader and whatever. But it does work. That's crazy. It really works.
Thank you. That's a wonderful witness to the power of the conclusion of this process. But your major point was that your sponsor was the sounding board that helped you see the truth of the lies that you were still believing in your 8th step. Yeah. That's why this is an inventory. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. No, wonderful. All right. Thank you, everybody. We're going to, I think, pray. Yes, there we are. So pay attention to the forgiveness lines. There's the 3rd line and second to the last. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness. That where there is discord, I may bring harmony. That where there is error, I may bring truth. That where there is doubt, I may bring faith. That where there is despair, I may bring hope. That where there are shadows, I may bring light. That where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen.